Good turnout here. We might as well get started here. We're at our time. So,
James Cook showing up?
the which?
James Cook, is he coming?
I think he dropped out. Yeah, I mean, he RSVP'd yes and then changed it at the last minute. So yeah,
Oh, really?
I feel the same way. Yeah, it's too bad because he knows what he's talking about as opposed to me. All I know is the same thing that I read with the rest of you read and the audios that the rest of you have been hearing. Yeah, I'm certainly no expert here, but I'm finding this interesting. I'm hoping you guys are finding this interesting as well. Here we are, week 3. I keep saying, yeah, Matt is certainly a wonderful, wonderful explainer. And I trust him. I trust that he knows what he's talking about. He's up there in terms of understanding this material.
David, can we ask what you got in the class so we see whether we should listen to you or not?
I got an A.
Okay, I'll listen.
I got an A in every philosophy class I ever took, with one exception. Postmodernism. That was the one B I got. Shows you how difficult postmodernism is. Postmodernism is very difficult. That was the one B I got was postmodernism. It is that's very difficult stuff.
It's because you're stuck in modernism, huh?
Oh wow. Look at that.
James Cook.
Yeah.
We're looking for you, James.
We were just talking
James Cook?
too bad that you dropped out, James, because you're the guy who actually knows this material.
Oh, then I have to change my name.
Welcome. Yeah, I was sad to see that you had RSVP'd no at the last minute, and here you are. Well, that's great.
So I was still positive on a different site. I apologize.
Yeah, yeah. So this will be a lot easier now that you're here. I am glad that there's a lot of people who are interested here. People still coming in. Yeah, most people who know about philosophy agree. Yeah, Heidegger is certainly one of the top philosophers of the 20th century. He's certainly in the top 5, probably top 3. And he's very difficult. In terms of complexity and hard to understandness, he's probably in the top 3.
Could David Miller tell us about being?
No.
I remember having a chat with him. I've wondered if you've moved on, David. Does Heidegger's being still trouble you?
Everything troubles me.
Yeah.
So David, are you a universalist or a relativist?
David who?
You.
David me?
No, I think he's having a go at me.
Okay.
Dear Stephen.
Sorry, Mr. Miller. Yeah, you a universalist or a relativist?
My fellow Melbourneite, Steve. Yes. I'll not answer that.
Okay.
Oh, okay, cool.
I've seen the fact before. I think the question though is very pertinent to this week's lesson, right, David?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the obvious thing here. I am presuming everybody's listened to the audios already, but just to reiterate, when you're the first thing he does is ask the question, what does it mean for something to be? And of course, our initial reaction is, what a stupid question. Why are you asking that stupid question? These are the types of reasons why everybody makes fun of philosophy and philosophers. This is the type of pointless conversation that nobody wants to get involved in. It's just irrelevant. It doesn't make any sense to us. It doesn't gain anything. So what Heidegger is saying is, if you start off with that as your opening question, you're questioning everything. You're questioning down to the core of reality and existence and psychology and that begins thought. Denken that he talks about. Denken begins when you ask that question, questioning the fundamental assumptions that you're given, that our culture hands us. You know, our culture just wants us to go along with the program, just have a job, get a good marriage, you know, watch Netflix, good movies, go to a concert once in a while. Just keep the procedure
What do you
going.
think? Don't you think ignorance is bliss?
That's what I was saying. You have to have, in order to pursue these matters, you have to have an interest in, but that's putting it mildly, a lust for the truth, a lust for reality. It's like The Matrix. Steve, did you see The Matrix, the movie?
Yes,
Red
yes.
pill or blue pill? Most people will not choose the red pill. Most people just want nothing more than the comfortable illusion, the comfortable reality, the bliss that you know, most people will not go this deep and ask questions about what does it mean.
So philosophers make the stupid choice.
Yeah, it's red pill or blue pill. Your choice. You get to
You know, we're like lemmings, and we see a cliff, and we're going to all jump over it. Whereas normal humanity is sensible.
You could say Arnold Schwarzenegger made the same choice. He said he chose the pain.
Got a hand raised. Shauna, what do you want? Shauna, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi there.
Okay, I'm wondering if I can jump right into it, or if we need still time for intros. But here's the thought I was thinking of. Oh, first of all, philosophers making the stupid choice. I would say we make the choice to be in angst all the time. That's the choice we make with the red pill. But here's the thing that I struggle with this idea of authenticity, this idea of awareness. And again, Matt's inspired me to engage with Heidegger again in the way he delivers his perspective, the way he describes the work. And so he talks about just, you know, that simple, take a breath and consider the simple. But the problem I have with this is this: how can we get at our thinking almost outside of the box of our day-to-day everydayness, when we have essentially all our thought has been created within the they self, within the world as it hangs together? How can we be truly authentic or stepping outside of that experience? Is it more of a superficial stepping outside of that experience? So that's the stuff that I wrestle with that idea of authenticity, since we know we come into the world as it hangs together. So that involves our language, how we interpret the world, like all of that has been biased. How can we truly have this unique reflection of what is going on, almost from an unbiased, outside of the box experience, when we really can't get outside of it?
I'd like to answer that.
Go ahead.
I mean, not answer it as if there was truth behind my words, but definitely the way I feel about it is that I think that's exactly what we do. You know, we question things, and some of us then go into, well, I don't understand it, so I'll turn on Netflix, which, by the way, I have no problem with. I like to be entertained too. And but at the same time, we question things, and some people go the route of politics. Some people go the route of, you know, taking some courses or questioning everything or doubting things or being skeptics. Other people go to theology and spirituality, if you will, and go through identity issues. But people are questioning and have been questioning for a very long time. It's just not the masses that do that. But, you know, we don't have to all be the same. I mean, what's interesting is to, you know, take one day at a time and have a view of the world in its totality and specialness and appreciation for the fact that we can question it. And I think Heidegger, although he'd never admit this, I'm sure, but I mean, he was so Buddhist in so many ways, in terms of the same kind of Eastern philosophy, which, you know, was spreading around that time anyway. I find it like magnificent, and I'm sorry that you got to be David in postmodernism, because that also questions and you know, there's skepticism, and people say, oh, you question everything, then you believe nothing is real. I think that's what makes the world so magnificent, and even the fact that we're sitting here with using technology, which I don't know what Heidegger would say about this, but we're using technology to also question and find our project in a time where we're functioning in the world as an existing person, you know, people. And this is our world right now. So we have to, in this time and being, we have to embrace this to participate in our existence, in our presence. And I think that's what he means by presence and presencing. And I hope I'm not getting him mixed up with Derrida, because I'm also taking a group on that, and sometimes I do get confused.
Well, Audrey, you did highlight something that we had discussed in terms of a response to this, in terms of my group from Edmonton, that it was the exposure to other they selves. So, and that seems to be the way people will do it. They'll go traveling. They'll sort of try and get outside of their smaller they self box. So they're not getting outside the larger box, but at least they're getting exposure to different they selves that might interpret things differently. And that seems to be the way people address the.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But there's also something that comes before that. That's the action of how they deal with it. But the first thing I think has to do with questioning. Something in your gut. And I don't know where that comes from. I mean, maybe Kant says it's Newman. I don't know. I really think that something has to happen first. You know, that's my experience of my trajectory. And I can see, you know, how different it is for, you know, I come from a family of 7 kids and very Italian American family, which American Italians don't, in my group, the New Yorkers, they don't want to question too many things. They want to accept. They want to assimilate. They want to understand that there's a structure in the world. They don't want to go outside that. But some people do. And more of those people do that. And you know, and they take their different avenues, and it just takes a while. But I think that happens right before action. I have no proof of this. I'm not a scientist, you know, but I definitely, I heard a story. I heard on NPR the other day, there was some interview with a neurologist and who wrote a book on the brain and how it constantly is in flux. It doesn't, you know, how identity changes, how things change based on what's happening in the time and presence of your life. And it fits so well with Heidegger's being in time. Because things constantly change, and we've always been told that your brain is your brain is your brain. And as you get older, you lose cells and you don't change behavior unless you go into some special program. But it actually happens where you adapt. And I think Heidegger is telling us to question and to look and to do this. But there's something that happens first.
Things are in flux, yeah, as Heraclitus said.
Yeah, Heraclitus, exactly, the same one out of the ancients. He was incredible. And I can find a million Taoist, you know, books that say the same thing that Heraclitus says.
Yeah.
You know,
some people go ahead. Yeah, some people may navigate these the authenticity without reflecting on their need to learn how to do it. They may just do it as a matter of navigating life. Like the best driver may not know a damn thing about the engineering of his struts, but he feels his way through. He doesn't have to look at the manual and do the specs. He works by a different kind of relationship to what he's doing. So this analytic of your own being is a different calling from even living authentically. So I'm not sure that there's a calling for anyone to be a philosopher, but a philosopher. And I don't want to call someone living authentically a philosopher just because they're living authentically.
Okay, James Cook, go ahead.
I think this section that you outlined of the book is really key to understand the analysis. This is the analysis of being, according to Heidegger. This section, chapter 1 of division 2 and so forth. The numbering of the book is so difficult, but the section 9 through 18 or something like that, I think, is what you published. And he's actually, he makes several important points. The analysis that has to be done is ontological. In other words, you can't just think about things as in the sense of how we feel about them or how we experience them, or in their already everydayness, or even in the culture that we swim in. And everything, including the culture of itself, has to be brought into the light and reassessed. So I think that's the brilliance of this section of the book, is that Heidegger is actually telling us that we have to take every object and consider its presence. Consider your presence at hand, is his term. So, and take the presence of hand of every object and decide what is it? What is the difference between something present at hand? And one of the methods that he uses is he says we take the difference between the presence at hand and Dasein. So what is the difference between Dasein and presence at hand? And don't yield to the temptation to the most ordinary definition of Dasein. We're not necessarily talking about the Dasein of a fish, although that may exist in some cases, or that may exist in broad cases. What you really want to do is take the presence of man, or in a theological sense, the presence of a soul, and begin to dissect that. And not just that, but also what is the difference between Dasein and a thing? In other words, a thing that may actually act, a thing that actually has a will in the world, like the they, or the culture, taken in a more broad sense, which is like, I think a lot of us do that. We sort of think, we live in a culture, and whatever the culture decides, I guess I have to go along with, because that's the way I was brought up. And, so the culture decides how people live and how people think. And I'm not really going to necessarily change the world. I'm not going to change the culture. So we have a kind of like an everyday kind of way of looking at culture that describes it as an entity. But the main entity to look at is ourselves, and we have to stop deluding ourselves. And anything that sort of takes away from that fact that we are the entity, that has to be always under consideration for ourselves, is kind of like a bit of a distraction from authenticity. So the idea that the culture is really what matters, or the others are what matters, or the job is what matters. I was struck listening to your professor, David, because he talked about the things that were keeping him in place. Right. And one of them was his salary for the rest of the semester being paid on time and things like that. He didn't mention that, but it occurred to me immediately. It's like we all have these unspoken contracts with the world, that the world's going to continue for the next year or two, and we're going to continue to be paid and so on and so forth. So that's all. I guess I'm trying to answer that question, although we're sort of moving away from it. I thought the question was a really good one. Where do I start if I'm trying to find the difference between living authentically and giving in to the they, or giving in to the way the culture is driving me forward? You definitely have to center yourself. You have to study. This section, this set of sections that was outlined by the professor is a very good one. And you study these things, you outline, you take notes, and definitely try to see what you can learn about existence, since that's really what matters for Dasein. What matters the most to us is existence. Sorry it takes so long.
All right, let's go with Shauna. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand sort of the ready at hand idea and sort of getting behind that. It's the getting behind that I'm curious about. And I might be, part of the problem might be that I'm trying to have Heidegger explain more than he's trying to explain. Because with authenticity, he's basically talking about sort of that awareness or that wokeness, if you will. And I'm just thinking, even the processes we use for thinking and analysis have been taught to us. They're not intrinsic characteristics. They're part of our society that we've come into. So my point is really, are we being authentic or getting behind things, if you will? And I'm struggling trying to find the best ways to define this. Or in fact, are we just wearing a new they self? So let's say, I'm going through life and I mean, much like Audrey said, and suddenly I'm going, well, wait a second, why do I work where I work? And then I come across some Buddhist teachings and some other things. Is that authentic? Is it just the process of asking the question that makes it authentic? Or am I just kind of sliding from one they self to another they self? And that's what's being described by Heidegger as being enough to be aware or authentic.
Yeah, James.
Just real quick, I think there's a temptation to sort of like feel that we failed when we're not as authentic as we want to be, or when someone is a they, and when there's a presence at hand in a particular Dasein, like in other words, we're not the only Dasein, right? So there's going to be other Daseins, and there's going to be people that just show up as imperfect Daseins, and maybe we get the tendency to call them the they selves. But the thing is that we don't, that becomes much less important than the self-analysis involved. In other words, if there is a they self, okay, and the they self is only contributing to the everyday average, to the persistent average everydayness of society, and it basically kind of may be in danger of stepping on your project a bit, right? Let's say the worst case, okay? So, or doing something that you feel is kind of contradictory to humanity or whatever it is, whatever your politics is or whatever. So we got a situation where the they self, ring the bell. But the important thing is that you understand the ontology of your world. You understand what someone with a given political view or a given role in your life, which is always the same, which has an averageness about it, or someone who that is actually, it's actually harmful to, maybe not to yourself, but maybe to someone else. So you're concerned about they selves, whatever. But they can never become your passion. Your passion needs to be your concern for things in the world, which they are part of, but don't get out of balance. So I think the answer to the question is don't get out of balance when you're basically viewing others not as designs, but as things in themselves, or as as kind of like unnecessary objects or bad influences, whatever. Don't. That'll help you not get bent out of shape. It's what really matters is the concern and care that you're forward, concern and compassion and care that you're forwarding in the world, not so much the project that they've taken on that's kind of bugging you, you know. And I think that's a good question because it brings up that whole question about what about things that bug you, whether they come from inside or outside. And that's always a factor. There's always things that are, you know, messy. There's always blood on the floor. I mean, depending on what act you're talking about committing, but you know, there's always that reality, the payback, the double payback of reality to consider. I love that tape, David. That was wonderful. Talking about himself as a young soccer player. That was fun.
Oh yeah. No, well, there's a lot of good conversation here. Let's go with Charlie. What do you have to say?
Mike, Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie. No? Yes?
Hello. Yeah, I'm using new technology, so let me know if I'm not coming through good. Just briefly, coming back to what Shona had just brought up, my take on Heidegger is at this point, following along, and yeah, I'm loving it myself as well, that in fact, stepping out, Shona was saying, well, you know, are we being authentic if we step out of our they self and move into another? My take is at this point in Heidegger's presentation, it's the stepping out is the key part. It's not which they you're stepping into, but the first step is just recognizing that in fact, we are indoctrinated into the world with beliefs and values and methods of operation and interaction. And once we come to that point of recognizing that and recognizing, oh, there are others, that my take is that is what Heidegger is proposing needs to be done first, to take off the glasses that we're given, to recognize that we're wearing glasses. Now, it seems to interact in the world, you need to wear glasses. There needs to be a Dasein, a project, and an interaction with the other theys. But it's a level of awareness. I get the sense that he is saying that many people, call it most people, aren't even aware that they're wearing glasses. So they're not even aware of a they self. They are just fully engaged in their project, playing soccer. And when all of a sudden they recognize, hold it, you know, I'm playing soccer. Hold it, there's something behind this. I'm wearing glasses, I'm making assumptions, which can happen from various angles, including traveling overseas, reading Buddhist texts and all these other things to say, oh, there's a different way to look at the world. So again, just to close up, my take that where Heidegger is at this point is that, or these lectures, is pointing out that it's just recognizing that we are wearing glasses. The authenticity then would be, okay, choosing which glasses to wear, you know, architecting your they self to then interact with the world.
And as I was talking about this stuff earlier, you know, you can understand perfectly why the majority of people will not do anything like that, because this is uncomfortable, this is disruptive, this is going to change your conception of your job and your relationships and your family and your friends and everything. You're fundamentally questioning things that the society would rather you not question, and that's a disruptive and uncomfortable procedure, and most people will never do that. So it's red pill or blue pill. Most people just want nothing more than the comfortable illusion. All right, a lot of people. So we'll go with David S. and then Dan and then Jim. Okay, David, go ahead.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, when you want to raise your hand, you get in line by clicking on the participants, and it's a raised hand. That way everyone gets a chance. Yeah, I had a question about in this whole Heideggerian analysis. Is there any takeaway for the question of the status of anything claiming to be true? Like using a word such as truth. And I don't mean appearing true or analyzing, oh, I believe this, it's a belief. I mean, in the conflict of competing values or meanings or epistemic systems, can one claim any objective standing? Or do we just, scientific thinking or a moral viewpoint? Or, when the Nazis come along, well, there's Dasein of the Nazis. They've got their, being. And I can understand it and wrap my head around it, but I can't make a claim against it except in my own sense of what's authentic. Is there any sort of, well, apart from me, is there anything to assert about objectivity? Thanks. I'll post that as a question here.
I would, my guess would be Heidegger would say that if you are getting to fundamental ontology, that's the goal of fundamental ontology, is to come to that core truth. And that is essentially what he's doing with fundamental ontology, is asking that question, what's the rock that we can stand on? Yeah, James, go ahead. Microphone.
You have to unmute.
Sorry. So I think what he's saying, or the way that he's speaking to me about this, might be a little bit personal, but I think he's coming from the standpoint that we have to make our own analysis of Dasein. So we make our own analysis of the world, and and because in essence we ourselves are Dasein, we're the ones that are actually qualified the most to analyze what is real, or what is true, what is truth, and what is non-truth. So that the true nature of Dasein should be available to us, not to necessarily, we don't necessarily get it from reading a book, but we get it from comparing different kinds of being, making judgments about ourselves and what we are capable of, because in the end, everything is coming through here. It's in other words, there's a lot said, like in epistemology, there's a lot said about, we have limited sense capabilities, but yet we know what's going on. And we have these books, where you can read people like Bertrand Russell and great positive thinkers, and they come up with various truths of their own, and their ideas are all contributing to us, right? And that's great. But in the end, what's actually really true is always a personal call. So it never deviates. So to actually be 100% authentic, we have to be at peace with that. We have to be with ourselves, being the ultimate arbiters of truth, because there is no other entity that we actually trust with that. Maybe we have a mother that we could trust with it, or, maybe, but I mean, in most of us are ourselves the arbiters of truth.
So his project.
So I just think it's be able to take responsibility for everything you do and come across as truly authentic. You also have to take responsibility for truth.
So when we take responsibility, we're using him as a sort of someone who taught us how to read maps, but now we're on our own. Yeah, okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Dan, next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So a few things. First, so this idea that if we can get behind things and see them as they are, I think Heidegger will say no to that. And I think one concept that he mentioned there in Being in Time is this idea of hermeneutical circle. So basically he said, we are there, we pose the question, we answer it, and we kind of move in circles, always assuming something and always trying to go deeper and deeper, but we never get to the bottom of things. So we are always in this circle, and we kind of regress if we are capable of asking the right questions and following those questions. But again, we are always in this kind of a circle, moving deeper and deeper if we can do it, if we are able to do it. The second thing is, like, all this idea with authenticity and Dasein. So he goes to that question because he said we are the one who asked the question, what is being? And because we are asking that question in order to clarify and to get to being, we need to clarify what is Dasein. And in order to clarify that, we need to get to this concept of authenticity and be authentic, or otherwise we cannot pose the question, or we cannot give a satisfying answer. And probably another thing is, like he said, that we were able to give a partially satisfying answer in the past, like the ancient Greeks, and since then we are bearing this answer, and we are getting farther and farther away from this. So it's kind of like, if the truth somewhere is back, it's not somewhere in the future. So we kind of need to regress, not to progress, to get to the. And going back to the question of truth, I think Heidegger said that there is a truth, and that's what he, like all this concept of aletheia, when a new world opens and beings appear, they present themselves in this perspective. That's what is true. And I think it's kind of, it's not exactly objective, but it's very close to what we understand as objective truth. And it's all relative to this opening, and it's directly related. Like basically, I think he said that true is being with capital B, and yeah.
Yeah, fundamental ontology, or denken, as Heidegger's been asking questions to the core, getting to what is truth. Yeah. Okay, so we got Jim, and then we'll go with Sam, and then Audrey, and then Tristan. Okay, Jim, your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, then Heidegger said that the Dasein, the definition of Dasein includes others, right? And so you're always, thinking of yourself in relation to others. But how do you draw the distinction between being authentic and inauthentic?
Yeah, I think I was going to go directly to the text. I mean, we come here for discussion, not to be read to, but I want to keep the discussion going. But I think in the text directly, he does address that in the top of page 220, where he talks about the distinction and how to do that. If we have some time, I think we could go into that in depth if we want to go through those paragraphs. But yeah, definitely something we need to consider if we're going to go any further in this. Okay, Sam, your turn. Go ahead.
Me, Sam? There's another one, right?
I think there's Sam Rose. There are two Sams? I think. Oh yeah, Sam Rose. Sam R.
Okay. Me. Okay. So going back to, I forget who he was, the one at the beach. I think it was Charlie. I just had some thoughts about, I guess, what Heidegger's intention is, or I'm not super eloquent today, but I think what Heidegger's trying to say is, like, I don't think he's trying to get us to watch our feet when we walk all the time and be this super self-aware thing. I think he's just trying to say that there's this, like, other way to approach the world, which is different to this overly rational, overly scientific way that we normally understand things, or that we are told to understand things. And I think his intention with that is, but when he wants us to understand the world in terms of our interactions with the things in it, I think that naturally gets us to question what's going on with our reality and the way we're interacting with things, and to get us to think more about what we're doing and get out. I think that thought process gets us outside of the they that he's talking about.
Denken.
So I think what he's doing when he's making up words and he's hyphenating words, I really think he's just trying to convey this sense of forming your own relationship with things. And that act alone is enough to temporarily separate you from the they. I mean, we live in a social, we live in a society. So I don't think he's saying you could always permanently be apart from the they. I think you're always a part of it, but understanding the world in terms of your interactions and how you exist differently when you're with others, or how you exist differently when you're a carpenter and you just grabbed a hammer, gets us to be more engaged with our reality and our life and the lives of others as we're interacting with each other. And that's a lot different than just saying this hammer is just the sum of its parts, chemically speaking, or mechanically speaking. It's more than that. It's also what the hammer means to me when I use it and how I feel when it's in my hands.
Yeah, coming to a different conception and contextualization of reality and the things around us, approaching it differently, just not accepting the standard everyday, daily ways of being and existing and interacting with things. And the more you're doing that, the more you're questioning, the more you're changing the way things are. We live in a society that's, you know, as Matt says on the audio, it's entirely commodified, toolified. How do I profit? How do I gain something from everything? You know, my religion, my politics, my job, my relationships, and that's such a reduced view of the human experience, and that's Denken. That's how do you get to the core of changing that? And also the other point you were making about, you know, change. You know, all Germans write like that. They all of the heavy Germans, you know, they hyphenate words and neologisms. And
all the heavy Germans.
The question is, well, why do they have to do it that way? You have to do it that way. You can't use everyday, ordinary, daily language that you read in the newspaper to explain these subjects. You have to change the way you're thinking about it, change the language, change the vocabulary of the way you're thinking about it, and in order to get to a different way of conceptualizing these matters.
Right. And I think when he's talking about authenticity, I think he's just talking about that engagement with the world.
Yeah, that's unavoidable. Yeah. Okay, Audrey, next.
I may have forgotten the actual question that I was addressing, but if we're talking about objectivity still, I don't see where Heidegger says that. I feel like he's talking about uncertainty, and I see that in the way he describes authenticity and the way he describes being in the world, and Dasein. I mean, it's just in world space, and everything is based on relation to other, and that you do things, or you create things, or you make decisions in, or your passions belong to what's happening in context of, you know, of the boundary of the environment that you find yourself in. That's what authentic presence means. And I think I was trying to find the actual, you know, I have a different version. You're reading Stambag, or how do you say her name? That's the book that you, the text that you're using? Because I'm using I have that as a hard copy, but which shows the pages that you showed us.
Yeah, if this is coming up again, when I give you the PDF, that's coming from a different textbook that's coming from the existentialism textbook. So the page numbers aren't going to correspond to your.
Oh, because they correspond beautifully to Being in Time, translated by, what's her name? Joan Stambag. I mean,
I don't know.
It follows exactly. But in my version that I have on online, it's harder to find. But anyway, so I think that he's talking about, I don't know if anybody's read Wittgenstein, but Wittgenstein talks about things in context. You know, that our language and our communication is based on, you know, what's happening in context. There's no certainty, and that doesn't mean there's no rules, and there's no agreements of how to proceed, but there's definitely no objective truth, I guess is what I'm saying. Which makes perfect sense to me, but you know.
Okay, James, go ahead.
Yeah, that was interesting. Something that Sam Rose said, which was really interesting to me, he he brought up the idea of the design of others. So, you know, so that's something that's really at stake for us when we're just beginning to navigate the analysis of ontology in terms of being in the world. So when we're doing that seriously, there is this kind of like situation where we have to deal with other designs, you know, and we have to learn to, in our authentic selves. And by the way, the word authentic comes from, you know, essentially persistently being yourself. In other words, showing yourself as yourself in a more or less consistent manner, and not trying to not make mistakes, not by trying, you know, trying to avoid making mistakes about changing personalities from day to day and so forth, but just simply, it can be described as simply being yourself for, I think, for a lot of people. So authenticity doesn't really have to be that special, but what it means is that we're essentially coming from self. We're conscious of self and we're coming from self, and we have a certain understanding, and that where we're coming from comes from a certain understanding. An understanding is a kind of like a way of being. It's a way. It's one of the ways we have of being as Dasein, and we don't deny that people who are not Dasein, in other words, people that we have thingified, and I admit I have thingified people. I have kind of like been done with people because of the way they treat others, or because of, or I perceive them treating others, or how they treat me. There are times when we have to thingify people. So they're not all Daseins, and definitely the ones in plays and the ones on TV, not necessarily the anchor persons, but you know, some of the ones on TV we thingify, because we see them as not being alike. We see them as not, perhaps as not being authentic, having all the worst lines in a comedy, for example. So the thingification of people is not something that's specific to Dasein, but it is a fact of life. It's a fact that, you know, we just don't have enough time to try to resurrect everyone's thinking that we know. There are people that are able to think ontologically, and there are people that seem to not be able to do that, seem to not feel there are any consequences for their actions. So that we don't have to make that a specific problem, but we do have to recognize that other Daseins are a very important part of our lives. And when we have other Daseins in our lives, we should treasure the opportunity to interact with those people, compare notes, find out, you know, what their ontology, how their ontology compares with ours, and grow from that experience in our understanding. That's a feature of, I think that's a really important feature of Dasein that Heidegger definitely does not talk very much about, but it's something that's very important to us when we have friends and life partners.
Yeah. Okay, Will, go ahead. Audio, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Oh, my bad. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Like, could you point to like the closest real world example of a society of people that do live authentically? Is there a modern example of that?
Yeah.
Like in today, right now?
Yeah, I would say that it would probably be, to a certain extent, it could be the elite. It could be any family that's sort of basically that naturally in a state of Dasein, any family that is actually capable of living without taboos, anyone that is completely open to the discourse of others. So it's a recognizable trait, Dasein. You start to see people who are open to the discourse of others and don't defend themselves at the drop of a hat. You know, that understand that they are only one among many beings on the earth. People who have really done ontological analysis. There's a sign. You can find these people. So yeah, there's definitely families that are educated in Dasein, and there's definitely a subsection of society which you can begin to recognize as being totally Dasein, as actually sometimes they're movie actors, but not always. There's so few of them are comedians. It's people that are able to take their understanding of the world and move it forward in their relationships with others. That's a sure giveaway tell of a Dasein. And
just to bring it, because I don't know any like
no,
movie
it's hard.
personally.
It's hard to find people.
So,
it's hard to find people. No, I understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say these were like you? Would you consider yourself right?
Because I do ontological analysis, and because I've tried to study, you know, because of the care I have for being authentic. In other words, reflecting myself, and the fact that it changed my life. That these are kind of like giveaways, personal giveaways to me. That yes, I have become authentic in a certain sense, and I have become, you know, in the sense of expressing myself, and I've become authentic and being consistent, and I am aware of my existence as a there. So I'm not going to, you know, I'm never going to remove my existence as a there again. I'm always going to be the there, James Cook, and I don't have any reason to. I've constructed my life. I try to construct my life in a way so that my there is my authenticity.
Okay, Shauna, your turn. Go ahead.
Okay, this time I unmuted before I was called upon, so there was no lag.
Yeah.
So I've done just one full reading of Being in Time. And I mentioned that because what I was getting, and so this is more of a point of clarification, that we're all, as humans, we're all Dasein because of our potentiality, that it, so that it sounds, James, with your description, that you're saying that a person can come in and out of that description or being defined as Dasein, whereas my, granted, you know, naive initial read of the text was that humans, because they have that potential for self-reflection and going beyond, are Dasein, that everyone, all humans are Dasein.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I kind of felt the same way originally. I think I felt like there must be something in here for everyone. There must be some way that every human is a Dasein, or at least a potential Dasein. That makes complete sense. And probably Heidegger would say that. He would probably agree with that statement, Shauna. But the horrible reality is that the average everydayness of life hides the truth from us. It hides the way of being that would make our lives optimal in a large number of ways that it doesn't necessarily seem, that don't necessarily seem available to us now. We're too afraid of failure. We're too afraid of offending our loved ones. We're afraid of sticking out. So the amount of pressure that's on everyone not to flip, if you will, I'll use that kind of quantum mechanic reference. Flip to Dasein is enormous. So it's not an easy state switch. It's more or less of a methodology of life, or a methodology of thinking rather. And this methodology of thinking, which leads to actually acting differently because you find your authentic mode of action. So, and the authentic mode of action is different for everyone. So it's not that easy to actually point at a guy and say, ah, yeah, he's so authentic, or he's, the sky is Dasein. No, I don't mean it's like that. I just mean that, it's something that it's rare. It's a little bit rare. Not totally, but there are, like I think there are clusters everywhere. There are clusters of Daseins. And you may have clusters of Daseins in your life. And you may be, and you may be in one automatically without having even done that first reading of Heidegger. So that's totally amazing fact, and they might be in all kinds of places. They might be theologians. They might be, like I said, they might be actors. They might be theologians. They might be psychologists, just people that just sort of like pop up out of nowhere and break through with a kind of authenticity, break through with just a high level of authenticity and capacity for describing reality in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying. Is that these people are among us. It's just that they're a little bit rare.
Yes, no disagreement there. Mine is just, in a sense, just splicing out terminology from Heidegger's perspective. And so it's being a little bit nitpicky, but it was just something I wanted to have clarification on. My understanding is that people are always considered Dasein, but they're considered what I would interpret what you described as he would call it authentic, people who are being authentic then. But because we have that capacity for that kind of thought, we're always in the state of being called Dasein. And so again, it's not so much my interpretation or my real world experience with his thoughts, but his, how does he define these particular states? And again, my understanding was that he considered people were Dasein all the time because of that potentiality. And when they are able to move into, well, essentially that authentic place, then they're authentic. I guess that's the description that would be used. But they are always Dasein. But again, it's just a small thing that I'm trying to just be clear. I understand what Heidegger was trying to say. There are the terminologies he's giving for different states.
Okay, we got a lot of people. I'm going to do my best. I think we're going to go with Dan, and then Audrey, and then Tristan, and then Zach. Okay, Dan, go right ahead.
So going back to example of authentic people, I think Heidegger will say that the most authentic people are, like, for example, the peasants there in the Black Forest. He lived there and he liked them and he appreciated them more than all the other intellectuals that like he met in town and so on and in his university. So, and pretty much he agree with those peasants because he thinks that they kind of stay in touch with primordial truths and things and what we call things ready to hand, like the way they engage with their tools and with their world. And I think somewhere later, like Heidegger in a way is very anti-rational, and he said something like that, like expel from the truth of being rational. We rational people, we circle around ourselves. We lost our way, and we just move around in circles without any meaning. So I don't think like ration or logic are ways to be original or authentic in Heidegger. So we kind of need to stay away from that if we want to be authentic and go back to practice his things and what he called gods with small g.
Okay, I'll go with Audrey next. Go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to just read something here. I don't know what page it is in your version, but it's note 1 actually. This is for Shauna actually, because what it says here: this entity with which of us in is himself, and which includes inquiring as one of the possibilities of its being, we shall denote as the term Dasein, and that's note 1. And so the way they describe note 1 is the word Dasein plays so important a role in this work and is already so familiar, blah, 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 and Heidegger, that it seems simpler to leave it untranslated, except in the relatively rare passages in which Heidegger himself breaks it up in the hyphen version to show its etymological construction, literally being there. There is traditional German, traditional German theology, philosophy, it may be used quite generally to stand for almost any kind of being or existence, which we can say that something has the existence, like say of God, for example. Basically, though, he goes on to say in the notes that it's a constitutive thing. So constitutive in the sense that, oh, I see what you're showing me. Where's the note on the screen? I don't see the note.
I think I've got it. I think it is a different translation, but I think I got the part you're looking at.
Okay.
This is actually the one I wanted to cover. Actually.
Okay, so basically he's saying, though, it's a constitutive, that Dasein is constitutive, which means it's in context. So it does mean potentiality from what I understand. But it's also, because of that context, within that context, you can be authentic and you can be inauthentic. You're still existing. You still have the potential, but you're choosing not to go through with it. You don't have the passion or something.
Yeah.
It's really hard to articulate, but I think I have an intuitive sense of what I'm talking about. And I think, James, you would agree, right? James, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I really did want to get through this. Ontologically, existentia is tantamount to being present at hand, a kind of being which is essentially inappropriate to entities of Dasein's character. To avoid getting bewildered, we shall always use the interpretive expression presence at hand for the term existentia, while the term existence as a designation of being will be allotted solely to Dasein. The essence of Dasein lies in its existence. Those characteristics which can be exhibited in this entity are not properties present at hand in some entity which looks so-and-so and is itself present at hand. They are, in each case, possible ways for it to be. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Possible ways for it to be. He's talking about potentiality, possibility. Yeah, we all have potentiality in us. We all have possibility.
Right.
And so does everything, so does your job, so does politics, so does all the being as it is, which is this entity possesses, is primarily being, So the idea, and I'm going to go to one of the notes on Matt provided. Here we are, section 9. To understand our unique being, you cannot thingify us. We exist. We do not have an essence. We have a peculiar way of showing up in the world. Things that have a fixed nature or being, like a rock or a table or a mountain or trees, Heidegger describes as present at hand. Okay, so yeah, the essence of the entity is, in fact, lies in its to be. Its being what is must be conceived in terms of being, existentia. So there you go, existentia, being present at hand.
Right.
Yeah.
But with potential. And to be authentic, you have to use your potential.
So I want to go on to this one here. The way in which we exist, the way we live our lives matters to us. We have a stake in our existence. We care about it. See, does a hammer care? Does a refrigerator care to have a stake. We have a stake in our existence, what's going on in our projects that we're dealing with, our projections into the future, our potentiality and fulfilling that. We have a stake in it. Heidegger speaks of non-Daseins as being indifferent about their specific mode of being. So there you go. There's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Whew, yeah, this is tough going. It really is. Let's go with Tristan. I'm glad we got to go through that. Thanks, Audrey. I'm glad because I was planning on doing that. Okay, Tristan, go ahead.
I was just gonna add to like what Shauna's question was of clarifying this distinction, and then y'all just added to that too in point of the text. So what I think too is that we all possess Dasein. Every human being does. Not possesses, but is Dasein. And would Heidegger then be trying to say that, okay, so let's figure out what this authentic Dasein thing is. Let's demarcate and define what it is and show how it is kind of an exalted existence where you're kind of able to see yourself from above in a way. Are we then from that point of view going to be able to continue to outline, define, and move towards the meaning of being, and setting up the question first and then going towards the meaning of being, as this relational complex and whatever else. I haven't read the full text, so I don't know what other parts he goes into about, our care and stuff like that. So I guess, yeah, it is authentic, our beginning point, finding out how to be authentic, then we start there. That's one question. And then I wanted to add another thing. If someone at some point could help clarify like what existentia, like an example of what existentia would be in comprehending it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it for me.
Yeah, present at hand. It's just, he means, like rocks and refrigerators. Something that exists as a fixed nature or a fixed being.
So if I say existentia, am I talking about all real beings, all fixed things, or could I point at...
The difference is the Dasein has potentiality, has a stake in our projects.
I guess with the term like existentia, how do I use it in a sentence? Do I point at like at some headphones and say, oh, that's existentia, or it has the quality of existentia?
James has his
hand up.
David, I was just I don't want to contradict, but he does say that in the section he actually differentiates existentia from existing. He says that things have existence, and that Dasein is existentia. So things are existing, and Dasein is existentia, which is kind of like in the active part of existence. In other words,
existing plus.
Yeah, existence plus. So he is differentiating between active things in the world, or things present at hand, and the action of things that are present at hand, and the actions of Dasein with the word existentia. He defines that as being particular to Dasein, not to things. I can find the quote. It'd take me a little time.
Yeah. That's all right. Okay, I think Zach is next. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty new to Heidegger. I've read around Heidegger a lot, and I'm enjoying this so far. And I am most concisely identifying authenticity by sort of how we engage in care. And I saw that James Cook mentioned that he telegraphs the importance of care. And so there are these three like broad forms of care, and there are authentic and inauthentic ways of engaging in care. And I kind of look forward to learning more about that. And I would like to hear if anyone has any corrections or elaborations upon that point. Then I also do know that there are, that most of my life is pretty everyday living, and it's, I think, pretty difficult, if not impossible, for me to be authentic while at work doing my job, or maybe like driving in traffic. Maybe that's a bad example, but like just like my everyday living, it's difficult to be authentic, especially if we're in like this instrumental mode of being now, this like technological age. And then that sort of reminded me of a couple examples of who might actually be authentic. And I will close this. And again, this is all just sort of, these are more poorly congealed thoughts spoken aloud. They're not really clear. I'm not claiming to really have any expertise here, but I know that like this Peter Sloterdijk is this foremost scholar of Heidegger, and it's hard to imagine him not providing some type of example of being authentic at times. And then there's also this, like the filmmaker who made Tree of Life and a lot of other films does a lot of long shots of beautiful natural scenes and focuses on laying points in ways other than just talking. And I've always thought like David Foster Wallace would be really authentic. And he even wrote a little bit about Dasein in at least one of his texts. So those who are coming to mind, that's really all I have.
Yeah, Terrence Malick, Tree of Life.
Precisely. Yeah. And so many of his other amazing movies.
Yeah. No, you're hitting it right, exactly right. The idea is that we live in a culture and a society that tries to immunize us from that kind of reality, that kind of asking questions, that kind of raw confrontation with existence and you know the majesty of everything, and you know we want to just go into Smoothsville, you know, eat McDonald's and watch Netflix and don't question, and that's what the society we're living in tries to inculcate in us. Okay, Scott, I think you're next. Go ahead.
All right.
I think you're muted. Go ahead. Muted still.
Still muted. Scott, you're still muted.
Scott.
It's on the bottom of the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Geez, Louis. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi is so bad that I have to do the video.
I think you're on two places.
Oh, really?
I think.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is so bad I have to use my phone for
Oh,
video.
okay, sure.
Just ignore my avatar, although it does represent my true self. All right. So Heidegger recommends when tackling this issue of authenticity to meditate on death, like the Buddhists, of which he considers himself one. So from the position of death, you can see things that you can't otherwise. And what he's trying to get at is Dasein, which means being embedded in the matrix right now, or being in this matrix embedded situation where you're a center of experience and you're surrounded by all this stuff. So so examples of authenticity are people on hour 3 or 4 of an acid trip. These are people whose centers have dissolved and they can catch themselves in the process of coming into existence. Certain types of philosophical practice and meditation, when you undo yourself and you can sense the urges that are trying to put you back together again into the actually healthy and well-functioning robot animal that ignores 99% of everything that's happening, in order to reduce noise so that it can survive. So the ego comes into existence simultaneously with anxiety, and fear comes into existence biologically as a kind of like a projected pain or foreshadowing of expectation of pain. So I think biology is helpful to getting at this question of what is the self that is approaching the problem, which is the one that sits down with books and listens to audio, and then the real thing underneath all of this, which would be something like the interior guts of matter. So here's a fantasy. Imagine that consciousness is something like non-local being. And imagine that one of the things that it does is screw itself up by precipitating out into corpuscles. And so these corpuscles are flying around, and you have clouds of corpuscles. And then something happens over time, and this is where the self develops. Neg entropy kicks in. So the ego in Buddhism and in existentialism doesn't have a real existence like a rock or a grain of sand, because the existence of a self is negentropic. It's not the carbon and the hydrogen that is the self, but it's what they're doing that reproduces them in the future. And what they're doing is being as anxious as hell in order not to die. So I think that gives us access into what the self is. The self is it's a great gift of nature. Oh, by the way, so Woody Allen's another example of an authentic self. And what's funny about that is that there's nothing wrong with Woody Allen. I don't know if 5 years ago they figured out this interesting thing. Interesting to me because I'm an anxious person. So people pay money to try to get rid of their anxiety. It's actually a big business. They take drugs and they go to therapists. But actually, it turns out that what's called generalized anxiety, which we think of as being irrational, people that are scared for no reason, they're just generally anxious and they're scared all the time. I'm trying to think of a funny. Well, I guess Woody Allen's a good character, but there's Yellow Belly is the John Candy character that you may know if you're an SCTV fan. Anyway, that condition is actually a gift from our ancestors, because the reason that we have general anxiety is because if we didn't, we wouldn't be here, because we were falling out of trees. So in order for monkeys to not fall out of trees, they have to have generalized anxiety, because when they fall asleep, because when they were falling asleep, they were falling out of the trees. So it's actually be thankful and have gratitude that you're neurotic and scared all the time, because that means your biology is functioning. Because back in the old days, corpuscles attacked corpuscles quite frequently. They didn't have houses to live in, and they didn't have, well, I'm not going to say anything more about it. Anyway, so there are some thoughts on remembering the importance of biology to doing Heidegger, because he's trying to get at that transition, just like you get in Buddhism, between the real stuff and then the particular configuration of stuff. And the idea is that the configuration isn't the final thing, that there's something underneath biological homeostasis, and that's the random crap of the universe. And there might be something underneath even that. And ultimately, you're that. You're the stuff that has congealed as matter and then organized itself through energy input by eating into a Woody Allen that wants to survive. And that projects everything, the ready-handedness, the objects in the world around you. All this stuff is done because the primate nervous system wants things to be that way. So being authentic, in conclusion, being authentic is recognize that you're owned by biology and you're owned by anxiety, and that's your natural state.
Okay, James.
Scott, those were some really good biological points. I think, or evolution-based points, but I think there's a reason, why Heidegger says, I'm not going to do any biology here. He says, because it's because he doesn't know anything about it. So it's important to have expertise in different fields. And there's an awful lot that people can say about different things that this particular book that we're discussing doesn't get into, because it's a very self-oriented book. It's basically only dealing with Dasein as being in the world and being in time. So if you're interested in those subjects, it's a really good book for that. And there's a lot of other subjects like being in the animal world or being among friends or, and being in relation to other humans that just aren't here. They're just not in this book. So that's why this tremendous generalization is invented and why he sticks with it for the entire book, being in the world. So I think that was wonderful for you to go outside the box, Scott, that kind of guy, and Zachary too, realizing that this is really about difference. When you find the difference between things, then you beginning an analysis and beginning to make distinctions. So that's what this is all about. So I think we're really on a good track in this discussion.
Yeah. All right, Dave S.
I hope I don't mess up the track. Let me ask a question that rings back to something I asked before. I asked about objectivity and truth before. Now I'm going to ask about obligation and Dasein. Is Dasein in its truth thereby entangled with other Daseins? In other words, in engaging with what's recognized as Dasein, does this create some kind of obligation for an intermoral experience, for a respect? Do Daseins get recognized and treated, especially in the world, because your caring is related to that caring? Or do you just see that caring and there's no, if you don't feel an authentic and entwining obligation, yours is separate and you can remain separate? You see what I'm saying? Is there anything in the structure of Dasein that links it together with other Daseins other than at a knowing level? Is there an evidence of another kind of caring?
Well, I think if that's to me, I think there is it depends on your level of involvement. In other words, a judge would have an awful lot more at stake than I have in appealing to the levels of concern of other people in his world, in his life. So he not only has those contracts with the judiciary to follow the rules of jurisprudence, as they call it, but he'd have to deal with all the individuals in the courtroom and satisfy their sense of justice, or else he might get reassigned or removed. Eventually, that happens. Sometimes judges just get floated away; they get reassigned to different courts, and because they've been very unpopular. Some judges are just good at playing to the lawyers, but there's also there is this general thing that people have different levels of concern about the world. We're not all under that same level of scrutiny. So at work, you're under a certain level of scrutiny where your involvement to your activities is always being measured. So, or it's always at stake, at least for you and your boss, or maybe some others. So the people that you've made agreements with. So that involvement that you have is important to your Dasein. And it's basically the same kind of importance that people with higher levels of importance in the world have. They take jobs at high levels of importance, like dictator, president, chairman, judge, and so forth. And because they take these, they're willing to take these high positions with a lot of responsibility, their involvement with other people becomes much more critical. So I think that's the way I would answer your question, David, is that the criticality of involvements with other Daseins is definitely variable. It becomes, a person my age, it starts to become kind of convenient because I only have my kids to worry about. I don't have elders that I worry about. So, they've all passed on. So the scope of my care in the world has been reduced to a very, very comfortable level. almost not easier to manage than it was before, but something that I have a better grasp of. I have a better grasp of its importance, and I have a better grasp of how to conduct those relationships. So what you're talking about counts a lot, but it counts at different levels. It can be life and death for people in certain jobs, and for people in other contexts. Not necessarily as that different from the number of relationships they were trying to conduct before. They have the same number of relationships between an inauthentic self and an authentic self, but the way they might conduct those relationships, or their amount of care that they invest into those relationships, may actually reach a higher level. That's my take on it.
I see your answer in terms of sort of instrumentality depending on the person's role. And yet these roles are not Dasein per se. These roles are fixed things like rocks. You know, being a judge is like being a rock. You have a certain position and structure, and you work in a certain structure. But the relationship of, see, that's about a cultural understanding, but it's not about an ontological requirement on Dasein whenever it sees Dasein. That's about, well, there are structures in society and then you'll fulfill those, and here are instrumental consequences. But underneath that isn't, without, you know, those can be accepted or rejected. You can violate expectations as a judge, but the point is, what is it that you're acting on and you're caring at that point, that you're making a determination of what you're going to do in acting that calls you in the role. It's not the, you know, the definition of the role may be in conflict with your authentic choice. So I'm saying, yeah, sorry, I don't know. I was looking for something that took you, called personally on each individual, regardless of their roles, because those roles aren't the Dasein, the open possible choices.
Well, I was just trying to give you a easy example. I apologize if it was too extreme, but if it seems too extreme. But my idea is that there are an awful lot of inauthentic judges. In other words, I'm interested a little bit in the court system, and I've been on trial a couple times successfully, and I've been what would you call it? In the courtroom situations, you know, where I got to see how judges were acting and make my own judgments about what they were doing and what they were contributing. And even on TV, I even watched trials on TV going back to OJ and probably before that. So I confess, you know, I'm kind of a courtroom junkie. So that's why I sort of like maybe took that random example. But there are both authentic and inauthentic cases. So that's all I would say, is that that's all I would try to express, is that both authentic and unauthentic. Being inauthentic may not get you fired from your job, because the inauthentic presence is basically in a sense, it's the authenticity of a being in itself, or the authenticity of a presence at hand. Here comes the judge, in other words. So in other words, everybody has to stand up. He's wearing a robe. You have to be quiet. You know, everything is all preordained because of the pre-agreed determinations of what constitutes a judge. That's the inauthentic judge. And there's also, what I was saying is that there can also be an authentic judge, and I've seen these because I'm a courtroom junkie. I know, you know, on TV, if you watch a lot of videos, like on YouTube, for example, you can watch videos of this judge in Rhode Island who makes friends with everybody in the courtroom. And that is like so incredible, because he's not just being a judge, he's actually being friends with people who have, he has to convict of a crime because there's evidence. So the idea that you can't be authentic because of your station in life, I think is absolutely wrong. You, wherever you are, whatever relationships you're in, you can conduct those relationships authentically. And that's my own take. I don't know if you're going to read that sentence in Heidegger, but that's my take on the situation. Is that we actually have a choice. We always have a choice. And maybe that's because I read Sartre that I say that, but we have a choice between authenticity and inauthenticity.
Maybe this is some of the satisfaction of watching Night Court, if you've ever seen
and the tremendous satisfaction you feel when you watch Night Court. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let Audrey go ahead.
Well, to answer the question the way I would answer it, I feel that, first of all, Heidegger doesn't use the word intent, but there's intent and there's empathy. And so that's what caring to me, when he uses the word caring and passion, that we're talking about your intent of relationship with other. And so how you use that in terms of the agreement that you have within your society of what roles you would take, there's ways to act within that. But the whole thing starts first with your intent, your empathy and your intent, which to me, I would do what do you call those slashes? Because they both mean similar things, but they are a little different. And that definitely equals action, and it's how you act and how you relate to other. Now, where in Heidegger it says that, I actually only see something like that when he talks about technology. There was an interview with him, which I think you can find on YouTube, in 1970. I think it was from 1970. Is that possible? Didn't he die before 1970? The YouTube video is 1970 anyway. But when he's talking about freedom of choice, which James was just talking about, like you have a choice and you have the freedom to act. And but you have to have that, you have to have empathy, or you're almost like on the verge of, a psychotic, or if you don't have empathy for other, you can't really have a true relationship, an authentic relationship with other. And then your actions would be based on, would go from there. So your intent and your empathy has to equal your action for you to be authentic. And within that authenticity, you react in your environment within the agreement of your region or society of how you want to act in the world. And so you can choose to be a judge, you can choose to be a teacher, if that's, or if you're in a Southeast Asian village, then you would work, and work with the shamans and that kind of thing. It doesn't matter, I think, the culture or the region or even the job that you take. I think it has to do with intent and your empathy.
Okay, Charlie, go ahead.
I'm going to try to offer something. It's been a wonderful discussion. As far as to bring in metaphors and the idea of actors in a play, and the ideas of sentience, awareness, biology, and stories, and awareness of our stories, and just different levels. So a concrete block, apart from entropy, doesn't have any sentience. A biological entity, brings in sentience, so it starts to care, right? Even an amoeba cares for existence, right? Different levels of complexity rise up, and you get different levels of awareness. A dog is aware of itself, but it's not totally, doesn't have the self-awareness that a human has. Now, Heidegger clearly is, talking about what it is to be human, and being human brings with it the awareness of self, right? Now, bringing that into using a metaphor of actors in a play, right? Use the example of, let's say we wake up, like you wake up in a dream. There was nothing before the dream, yeah? You're just in the dream. So you just wake up on stage and you're given this role and all these, beliefs and values and all of that. And you're interacting with all these other actors, on whatever stage you're on. And there are biological concerns of survival, which drives you towards thingifying things, much of like what Scott was pointing out. And then let's say at one point, something happens and you end up stepping off backstage, which you prior had no idea there was a backstage. You had no concept. Now all of a sudden you're backstage and you're saying, oh, hold it. These are stories. My story isn't the be all end all for me, but in fact, it is something I care about. I care about myself, but it is a story, and there are a bunch of other stories. And that's kind of taking off your glasses and saying, oh, wow, everything out there on stage is absolutely valid, but it's fluid and it is a story. And with that, then stepping back on stage, same character, different character, and we play different roles and all of that. We can bring with us a new empathy to realize twofold. One, as James is referring to the other Daseins, is those that have also been backstage that recognize, hold it, these are all just stories, and we all care about our stories, and there is something underneath, right, that we all share in common, right? And then we step in and we have particular individual concerns as, once we're engaged in our story. And there's still, you recognize at that point, there's a whole bunch of people on that stage that never got backstage or haven't made it there yet, may never make it. So they are much more in the thingifying world where they're just being about and going about, and their existence is, their story is absolute totality. It's like driving in a car and not you're seeing the road, you're not seeing the windshield. Then the moment comes, say, oh my God, there's a windshield, right? And the whole, it's like a paradigm shift. Everything just kind of changes. So in that regard, the thing about caring, I think, is once you've gone backstage and you come back on stage, your level of care and your capacity for care has greatly been enhanced because you understand more the commonality underneath all of these stories, including your own. And in that regard, there's also a much more, when you're looking at another person who's been backstage, and there's, as James would put, two Daseins there, recognizing that they're living roles and they're living a story and they're respecting each other's story, but they also recognize a common underneath behind it all. It is just a story. So anyhow, I just wanted to throw that out there, this concept.
Okay, Shauna, go ahead.
As people are talking, I'm having this almost deja vu experience where back about, I think it was about 20 years ago, I was in organizational management. And at that time, there was sort of this exploration of chaos theory and applying it to an organizational management paradigm. And one of the practices that was in place to achieve this, to create the idea that people are looking for simple solutions and going with what's known and just sort of regurgitating the old and just trying to work harder and faster. And so with this idea of chaos theory, is allowing people to get outside of the box. And one approach that was used to do this was actually exposure to information to the point of overwhelm. Good information, but to the point of overwhelm. And this would then cause people and organizations to to almost go into this reorganization. They would sort of feel inundated with all this information, and at some point there would be this letting go of pre-existing patterns, beliefs, goals. I mean, this could also happen when there was a real crisis happening and people felt desperate enough for change. They might be also sort of open and desperate enough to get outside of their box. And just as people are talking, it reminds me of this, and it's sort of the exposure, except instead of exposure to different techniques and in management strategies, it's just the exposure to the different stories of individuals and even the different stories of the they selves around them that will create that same kind of experience, perhaps of letting go of pre-existing patterns or what you're seeing in front of you and imagining something different or being open to something different.
I think Heidegger would say that's a good thing, that the more you're questioning, the more you're opening up the possibility of seeing things differently. Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
Oh yeah. There's just so much here is just, it's just Plato's story, isn't it? We're stuck back with Plato. We've still got 2,500 years of progress before we get to Heidegger. So why are we stuck with Plato? Being on stage, all the world's a stage and all that Platonic stuff. I'm just wondering why people adopt that approach. It's that rationalistic drive to drill into everything. Now, I'd suspect what Heidegger was saying is we don't really know. We assume we know. So the question is, this assumption, and how do we fall out of it? I mean, I would ask the question, what did Heidegger think about intentionality? Because Heidegger appears with his theorems when the world is suffering a crisis in intentionality.
Okay, James.
I'm sorry, I'm the only one with my hand up. I don't know if I can answer the question about the crisis of intentionality. I would probably answer that there's too much intentionality in the world. I don't think there's necessarily a surfeit, and there might be just exactly the right amount, so there's no crisis at all. But that's not my point in answering your question. You sort of brought up Plato and the continuing desire to create
I'll say you're being a rationalist again when you're saying there's too much intentionality in the world. It's simply sufficient to say that there is intentionality. No need to quantify it.
Yeah, that's my point is that in the end, you can't really prove it either way.
That's the horror. We're surrounded by rationalists who are, quantifying everything.
Okay, so with rationalism and what you said about Plato, the drive to do that is, I think, to a certain extent, that was taken on by Aristotle. He said that basically any philosopher could be wrong, and he took on the task of criticizing previous philosophers, including Plato. He more or less tried to prove that Plato's theory of forms could never actually match any potential existence, and I think that's in the metaphysics. So the tendency has been for philosophers ever since then, especially the empiricists, the post-rationalists called themselves empiricists, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just sort of showed up. They didn't have a name for themselves, but they believe these things, and they believe this was a way of getting away from this constantly requiring a knowledge of everything that happened. In other words, that was their goal. I think Hume was the one, we don't have to know everything that happens. We just have to form an opinion. That was the one before Hume.
Hume was a skeptic.
Huh? I forget
Hume
his name.
was a skeptic,
Yeah.
right?
Anyway, Hume was the major skeptic that led to Kantianism. Yeah. So he was the springboard for Kant. Let's put it that way. So the idea is that that particular kind of philosophy was trying to escape from this kind of like already knowing, but trying to find out the essential part of reality that corresponded with human knowledge, being that human knowledge was kind of embedded in the philosophy of the medievalists. The medievalists, of course, were a very religious group. So the philosophy of the medievalists stayed dominant through the rationalist movement and into the empirical period.
Wasn't
into
Heidegger's
the 18th
point?
century. Well, it was strong. Let's say it was very strong up until the 18th century. But go ahead, Stephen.
Wasn't Heidegger's point that we lost being in history? Yeah, he was claiming that being was present there with the Oracle of Delphi, and then bang.
Yep.
We lost with Plato. We lost it a bit.
Yeah, we lost the handle, and it was very relatively unimportant to Plato because he was all up in his head, discussing the right and the wrong of everything, the good and the bad, and then basically, Heidegger accuses Aristotle of getting off on the wrong track. It's at the beginning of the book. He talks about Aristotle getting off on the wrong track with trying to say that being was
was he on Diogenes?
An existence, and a kind of like characteristic of existence that is inalienable. So basically it kind of stood like that, that it was never really taken up again. And basically that's Heidegger's complaint. Heidegger's complaint is I'm the first one that actually started talking about that.
What about
since
Diogenes?
The medievalists, since the medievalists. Go ahead, Stephen. What were you saying?
What about Diogenes? Where do you think he fits with this?
I don't know what he said. I haven't researched Diogenes. What did he say about it?
Oh well, he was a cynic. He's a famous cynic. But one of his little tricks, his famous trick, was to run up and down the streets of Athens with a torch in his hand. People say, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm looking for people." Kept on running up and down. They said, "Look, there's plenty of people here." He said, "No, I'm looking for real people."
Ah, interesting. Yeah, no,
beautiful. Authentic. He was looking for authentic human beings, and he couldn't. Yeah. Or maybe it was Corinth. He moved around.
He may have had a point, as you do.
I'll probably make the point that I'm looking at Heidegger in context when he appears, because Heidegger didn't produce his philosophy just because he was a genius. He was a genius. It just happened to be at a certain point in history, and he was reacting to something. The existentialists all reacted to Hegel. And I think Heidegger was a reactionary as well. He was reacting. He's saying, we've lost contact with being, he's been a reactionary.
Well, in a sense, yeah. In a sense, you're right, Stephen. He's saying that it was cut off. It was basically kicked out of the arena, and we need to come back and examine the question of being. And he comes to a lot of very complex set of conclusions, no question about it. And it's a question of whether you can live with the complex, some version of the complex of the set of conclusions that he came up with or not. It's frame this set of conclusions in the book with another set of conclusions that you can map on your own from your relationships in the world, your involvement in the world, and see if you can come up with a kind of a moralistic, some kind of a moralistic mapping of what Heidegger was trying to say. Because he would be the first one to say that this is not the end of philosophy. He just wanted to destroy the current direction that philosophy was going in. He was completely open to having a modified future.
Destroy.
For philosophy. Well, he wasn't really a rationalist. You wouldn't say that, Stephen, would you?
Heidegger, well, he obviously had a rational background, but no, he wasn't a rationalist in the form of a card-carrying member of the Rationalist Society.
Yeah, he was a classicist. He was a classicist, yeah. He never avoided teaching classics. He did teach Kant, who was he's classified as an idealist, but a German idealist, a particular kind of idealist, different from Plato, who was the good, bad, beautiful, stinky kind of idealist.
Let's go with Zach next. Go ahead.
I actually wish I had lowered my hand. I was just going to talk about Spinoza and how I always thought that he balanced this commitment to extreme rational, logical rigor with sort of a desire to still live in the world and be active and not become too preoccupied with sort of logical investigations, and that experiences were an important part of exercising rational faculties in a certain way. That's really all I have.
Yeah, I know virtually nothing about Spinoza, actually.
I mean, I actually am curious if James or Stephen or anyone have any thoughts about that, but it may be best for another discussion because it's quite a digression.
Yeah, I took rationalism. That's probably my most boring class. So, Audrey, go ahead.
Oh, is my hand up?
If you have something to say, I don't mind.
Well, I don't mind either if I have something to say, but was there a specific question that I'm supposed to relate to?
I don't know. I'm just going by
because, I mean, I would definitely, I have questions about Heidegger, and I was thinking I love Hannah Arendt. And so I accepted a lot of where Heidegger went because he was in love with Hannah Arendt. And so I read more of him because of that. But his, and having a nervous breakdown and after he's rejected, after he joined the Democrats, so the Socialist Democrats, what do you call the Nazi Party? But I'm thinking that in terms of Dasein and what he's considered, what he says about authenticity, and that he went with his passion at the time, that he thought of something and he acted upon it. And we don't agree with, well, most of us don't agree with how he went, the direction that he took. But it doesn't undermine where he was going in terms of authenticity and Dasein and his relationship to other and uncertainty and actually embracing uncertainty. But then joining the Nazi Party almost was like he was looking for a certainty at some point. Now, of course, people change over the course of their lives, but it seems like somebody that embraced being the way he did and kept it to a very Western tradition and refused to go into bringing in any Eastern thought to it, even though that was prevalent at the time, makes me wonder, you know, all of philosophy, the way we're talking about the rationalists and we're talking about the continentalists, and, you know, I wonder, you know, there are all these people that have a thought because they're expressing their Dasein authentically, the way they think, and going with their passion and coming up with these treaties that they write about to participate in the world. And we agree or disagree, but they are still part of and participatory in this world, and that the ones that come after actually build upon. I wouldn't say, Stephen, that it's a reaction, that they're reactionary, but that you read something and you build upon it and you keep changing it. And that these people had, you know, including Spinoza, had very authentic ways of being and trying to get their point across, including Plato, whether you agree with them or not. And they were living, a lot of them, like Spinoza, in a time where it's heavy-duty Christianity. And so they were trying to not necessarily reach the masses. None of these guys were writing for the masses. They were writing for each other because most of them knew each other during their times. Is the law of small numbers. If any of you look at sociology, the sociology of philosophy.
You seem to be saying everything's, you're coming up with all these rationales.
Well, you call it rationales, but I'm calling it experience in the world and action in the world based on experience and your how you want to act and how you care for your society. And I'm not talking about logic. And that's when you say rationality, I think of logic.
Well, I'll give you an example. I have an intention to go up to the bank at the shopping centre, or shopping mall as you Americans call it, and I don't know, pay my MasterCard physically. We actually walk in and put some money on the MasterCard. I have that intention, but let's say I bump into a person in the shopping centre. So something unintentional has happened. So what is the difference between the intentional and the unintentional? Because massively, we are now living in a world where more than ever, they want to make everything intentional. You know, the computer program is just, you know, get away from, you know, actual presence and being in the world, where everything will be as we planned. And my big problem with that is I never planned to exist, as far as I know. I am an accident.
Right. There are happy accidents in the world, and that is part of participating in the world. That is part of your experience. That's your isn't that considered empiricism? It's your experience in the world as it occurs. It's within context. And intentionality, for me, doesn't mean it's your intention of how do you want to be in the world. It's not planning out. It's not your logic, you know. It's not the syllogisms of the world. That's not what I'm talking about in terms of intentionality. It's what your intention is in terms of caring and your empathy and how you want to participate in the world. Accepting that there are happy accidents and you don't always have to know the outcome.
I would claim that intention, it's very much something from the rationalist field. I'm not denying it. I think intention is very important. But intentionality is, you know, a big number in rationalism.
Well, that's very interesting, but I think then again, we're talking semantics rather than what I'm talking about. And that's the English language, unfortunately. And maybe in German, there's phrases within words. That's why our our translations are so weird. And so we have so many different translations. And I mean, that's what I find. So I've decided that in the winter, if we still have COVID and I can't get a damn vaccine, I'm going to try and study German so I could read this in German and see what the actual words mean, and don't get caught up in the English language where I get totally confused. And then, you know, I don't know.
All right, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I liked some of the things that Audrey was saying. I agree. You know, intentionality is just a mode of thinking, and it doesn't matter to me much more than any of the modes of thinking. And I think I understand for Stephen. I think I understand the. Oh crap! Sorry. I'm fine. Okay. So anyway, I thought I was muted. So yeah, for David, I think. For Stephen, I think that the anti-rationality, or however it comes across or should be labeled, I think is fine. It's just the understanding that thinking goes on. There has to be a kind of like there has to be a space for acknowledging that we have consciousness and that thought takes place, and there has to be space for some kind of rationalism without condemnation. So I'm just saying there has to be some space left. Zach made a really nice point about, in other words, why should we do this? Why should we be rigorous? Why should we, in other words, can't we just watch TV and go with the story as it is, and don't try to play one of the characters, or don't pick a favorite philosopher? Just let all that go on. And if thinking gets us in trouble at work, and we learn to stop thinking, isn't that the right mode of being for us? To sort of go along with things. Isn't Thanksgiving easier when we don't challenge other family members' beliefs or ways of being or actions? We don't criticize other people's actions. Doesn't life go a bit smoother? So is smooth the goal, or is authenticity the goal? And and could smoothness be authenticity? I think is actually the critical thing. Can we have smooth authenticity as opposed to rigorous authenticity? And I don't think it can be ruled out, but Heidegger himself is kind of I'm sorry, but Heidegger himself is a poster child for rigorous. He was his PhD. He was Edmund Husserl's PhD. So if you know something about Edmund Husserl, it's kind of like, holy crap. I mean, how could you ever be put in that situation where you had to write papers and grade and be an assistant to the arch rationalist of the entire existence of mankind, who, in the guise of a phenomenologist, in other words, his phenomenology was the phenomenology of thinking. So phenomenology of existence, which was Hegel's phenomenology, wasn't good enough for him. His phenomenology is the phenomenology of thought. So who could have a harder job than Heidegger? And the rap on Heidegger, when he was coming up, the rap on Heidegger was that he was unpublished, that he was poor in publishing. He was trying to get a job. This is around 1923, 1924, when he was just starting to put the book together in his mind. And he was trying to, because I read the letters between him and the other guy, whose name I always forget, but there's a correspondence between the two philosophers. And he's trying to put his ideas together. He's kind of starstruck by some of the work by his friend, and of course the work by Husserl, who we'd just been through the machine of, the PhD machine of Husserl, and he knows he's underpublished. That was the rap. He was underpublished. So what am I going to do to make up for the fact that I'm underpublished? I know what. I'm going to use my I'm going to actually publish, but it's going to be a full thing. It's going to be a full philosophical delivery. So this major book for a young man, to actually write, and have all of Germany wake up, and most of Europe, sort of like wake up and say, "Holy smokes!" Heidegger. They're all talking about Heidegger. Why is that? So that was the existence. That was the reality for Heidegger. As experience the trial by fire of PhDing for Husserl, being underpublished, being shown up by his contemporaries, forget his name, but by publishing popular philosophy books on their own, and he realized he needed a major work, and that major work would be the analysis of existence. So, for good or worse, that's what we're dealing with here. Is this kind of bomb that he placed on the earth as a result of his actual physical circumstances as a young scholar in Germany, where you had a lot to prove. You wanted to have a good job. You had to have a lot of publications. You had to have a really good track record, and he was a little deficient in that respect. So did he have a good education? Yes, he had a pretty good education. So that was basically for Zach, who I guess had to leave. Sorry. Oh, there you are. But it was basically the path for Heidegger forward was rigorousness, and that's what his PhD. That was the fault of the German philosophical system, where you had to learn classics and you had to learn Aristotle, and you had to basically follow whatever philosophers you were assigned to, and he was assigned to Edmund Husserl, who was the monster of philosophers in Germany at the time. So that's just it's not a judgment. I'm just saying that you can go either way. You can go smooth, or you can go rigorous. And if Heidegger seems a little unsmooth, that's the reason.
Okay,
he was rigorous instead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll take my hand down, because you basically just answered my question about the relationship with the change in direction in German philosophy, and whether or not he was sort of in opposition to Husserl or augmenting. He was taking a whole different perspective on the same issues you're saying in writing his thesis, but he wasn't rejecting Husserl. He was just saying, this isn't complete. I have to do this side of the work, right?
Yeah, I think he was basically he was probably really well trained in Husserl after being a PhD, but he had to look for his own path, and he thought it might have something to do with his expertise in Aristotle. He was teaching a lot of classes on Aristotle, and then he had this friendship with another existentialist, and whose name was, damn, you should know this.
Merleau-Ponty?
Huh?
Merleau-Ponty?
Huh?
Was it Merleau-Ponty?
No, he was German. Carl, it'll be under the relationships. Yeah. Carl, influences, good. Carl Jaspers.
Jaspers.
Yeah. So Carl Jaspers was a personal friend. They loved each other, actually, and they agreed. There was all these kind of like visits between families and stuff. So they were very close friends, and Jaspers was lighting it up. He was basically writing a lot of books on the existence about the being in the world and stuff like that. He was basically coming to grips with that concept. and teaching and bringing Heidegger and other people along with him. So we don't have the benefit of reading Jasper's books unless we're interested in that slightly more religious version of existentialism. But Jaspers was a really good guy, a really good friend, and they discussed this. And basically Heidegger came to the conclusion that in order to become someone, he was going to have to write a book, and it was going to have to be as good as these books that Jaspers was writing. And it would be based on what he was learning from both Aristotle and from Jaspers. And so it wasn't basically, I don't think it was directed against Husserl. It was just on a different subject. Husserl was all up in the head with this hyper rationalism, to sort of reference Stephen's point. And Heidegger was trying to come up with a counter-rational explanation for the crisis of being in the world in the 20th century. And he did see that crisis. He saw it as a crisis that was happening because of technology. He wrote about that both a little bit in the book and also elsewhere.
Thank you very much. And thanks, David. I got to go, but this is great.
Okay.
I'm wondering if it's going to be of value to go over some of the other parts that we talked about. We did a little bit of it. Well, let's see. Why not? Okay. So hope that can be seen. Dasein is never to be taken ontologically as an instance or special case of some genus of entities as things that are present at hand. Let's say that again. Dasein is never to be taken ontologically as an instance or special case of some genus of entities as things that are present at hand. So special. Okay, so Dasein is the opposite of present at hand. To entities such as these, their being is a matter of indifference, or more precisely, they are such that their being can be neither a matter of indifference to them nor the opposite. You're neither one nor the other. You're a void. You have no intentionality. You have no potentiality. Because Dasein has in each case mindness. Wonder what that might be. One must always use a personal pronoun when one addresses it. I am, you are. Okay, yeah. Sentience, presence, consciousness, awareness, I'm guessing. Furthermore, in each case, Dasein is mine to be in one way or another. So maybe, intentionality, purpose, drive, a choice. You can actually consciously choose which way to be. Dasein has always made some sort of decision as to the way in which it is in each case mine. I'll say that again. Dasein has always made some sort of decision as to the way in which it is in each case mine.
Yeah,
like you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice to not make a choice. You have to make a choice one way or another. Even if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
That's Heidegger writing for Sartre.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That entity which in its being has this very being as an issue comports itself towards its being as its own most possibility. Do that again. That entity which in its being has this very being as an issue comports itself towards its being as its own most possibility.
There you go.
Yeah. You can unravel that, but I kind of see what he's getting at.
The outmost, just memorize that one term, own most possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Comports itself towards its being as its own most possibility.
In each
nobody
case,
nobody else designed you.
Yeah, it has this possibility, and not just as a property, as something present at hand would, but because Dasein is in each case essentially its own possibility, it can, in its very being, choose itself. and win itself. It can also lose itself and never win itself, or only seem to do, but only insofar as it is essentially something which can be authentic, that is, something of its own. Can it have lost itself and not yet won itself? Ah, see that? See that trick there?
Mm-hmm.
Only when it can be authentic can it have actually lost itself and not yet won itself. You have to be authentic in the first place in order to lose authenticity. Or in order to lose potentiality, in order to lose the ability to choose, the ability to self-direct, autonomy. Authenticity and inauthenticity are both grounded in the fact that any Dasein whatsoever is characterized by mindness. Yeah, okay.
I think Matt said 222 was like major, the major page.
Okay, 222. Yeah, I think if I...
The three things.
Some of these. Dasein's facticity is such that... Where do I find that? There it is. Dasein's facticity is such that its being in the world has always dispersed itself or even split itself up into definite ways of being in. I'll do that again. Dasein's facticity is such that its being in the world has always dispersed itself or even split itself up into definite ways of being in. Okay. Yeah, you'd have to sit with that one for a while, I think.
Well, you have to go to the third section where it talks more about being in.
Yeah, so there's different ways of being in. You can be in the world, I guess. You can be in Dasein. You can be in the self, right? So if you're splitting yourself up into definite ways of being in, yeah, there are more than one way of being in. The multiplicity of these is indicated by the following examples having to do with something, producing something, attending to something and looking after it, making use of something, giving something up and letting it go, undertaking, accomplishing, evincing, interrogating, considering, discussing, determining. Yeah, all these ways of being in have concern as their kind of being, a kind of being which we have yet to characterize in detail. Leaving undone, neglecting, renouncing, taking a rest, these too are ways of concern, but these are all deficient modes in which the possibilities of concern are kept to a bare minimum. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways of being, there's multiple ways of thingness, there's multiple ways of existing, there's multiple ways of coordinating and navigating and associating with the world and with yourself. And yeah, I think the world as given, our society or our civilization and our culture, just gives us a one-dimensional way of associating and coordinating and navigating and being in the world. And what he's trying to get at is there's such a richness and a wealth of possibility and potentiality that we're losing, that we're eliminating from our possibilities.
I might add there that, you know, the prisoner who's living down in the dungeon, you know, it's the old Monty Python joke about the prisoner who's in the dungeon. He really thinks he's having a good time in there. It's all he knows. And he's thrilled about it. And, you know, it's his limited existence, he's decided, is the be all and end all of everything.
It's like you give somebody a blank check and they make it out for a Big Mac and fries.
But I think he was better off than us because we've been given so many temptations that we're, you know, we want things and the things we want aren't always good for us.
That's true.
Whereas, you know, when we were happily beaten up by the Romans and thrown in a dungeon, that was the best of all possible existences. It was easy to deal with.
It would not be better for men to get what they want. For men to get what they want.
What do they really want? Well, I mean, I didn't intend to be a human grub worm living on the planet Earth, did I? I'd be more inclined to shake my hand at God and say, why the bugger did you make me this, as Kierkegaard's father did. Kierkegaard suffered for the sin of his father.
So is that what Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre took from Heidegger on this idea of authenticity and inauthenticity sounds pretty accurate, because Sartre seems to give some very good examples of inauthenticity, with the description of the waiter and some other characters that are living a life of the in itself rather than the for itself. Would that be kind of a very clear description of what Heidegger is also?
I think I got it right here. The way in which we exist, the way in which our lives matters to us, we have a stake in existence, we care about it. Heidegger speaks of non-Daseins as being indifferent about the specific mode of being. We describe human beings as authentic when they acknowledge and are cognizant of the stake they have in their existence, when they take responsibility for the way they live. Inauthentic is the opposite. I'm always making decisions about how to live. How I relate to those decisions determine whether they are mine and authentic, eigen and eigentic. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, so you can take your situation like a waiter. Like a waiter wants to be an actor, but he's participating in the world and he's going to be a waiter. Is that what he's talking about? He's going to be practical and be a waiter so he can earn a living to act on his passion of being an actor. Is that what that means?
Yeah, it's more like he's not just being a waiter, but he's also giving up his choice, right, to be something else, or to.
Well, he's choosing something so he can be something else. So in other words, you get your pay every week.
Sure. As
a waiter, and you go to auditions every night.
Right. Yeah, it's like playing a role, and then you become the role without entertaining the option that you could play a different role.
Right.
That was very good.
Sleep.
I think this is actually pretty important.
Go ahead.
Any particular way in which we live our lives has an a priori condition. In other words, if we are to live, it is going necessarily to include certain things pre-given. It was just the way with the situation that we are given, pretty much from birth. This is another way of saying that any way we live, any way we be, is grounded on a basic general structure. What is this structure? Being in the world. Translate that phrase as human beings have their unique mode of existence in the form of being immersed in the context of a meaningful project. In other words, our being in the world are always being immersed in, being concerned with a meaningful project of some sort, being a student, a friend, an employee, a Republican, or, etc. Going to the store, making dinner.
Well, that's a pretty trivial list. But it's a kind of an entry level description of the potential of human potential. It's showing up on.
You would agree. Yeah.
Time for dinner, not getting fired at work for being too for making radical sounding comments about existence.
I think he would agree. I think it's not about the quality of the project. It's just the fact that there is a project, whatever it might be. We can criticize people's projects, but we all have a project. You don't have the option of not having a project.
That was my point. Stop measuring things, rationally. Oh, this is more important than that. That's not the issue. It's the fact that it is.
I think the fact that you have projects at all kind of speaks that they can be better or worse. So in other words, I think there's a place for rationalism here. I think when you have trivial projects, okay, if we're just going to measure trivial projects, like I think not getting fired is a really good one because it's very complex. It shows the complexity of life. the fact that we get into situations where we don't pull the trigger on every event, when there's kind of like a human relations office that's standing behind the wall at all times, monitoring how you're getting along with the other employees and your boss, and whether you're completing projects on time and so forth. So there's this constant kind of like impingement of the world on Dasein, on being. So that has to be taken into account. But the fact that it exists doesn't mean that we're not free. The fact that that exists doesn't mean that we don't actually have a role in that world that we've kind of like analyzed as having those traps. It's exactly as if you were in a logical game. If you were playing chess, you would have the other player, especially on a grandmaster level, you would have the other player trying to design traps for you. I know if he gets his pawn on G6, I'll be able to win the end game. If I can just get his pawn to G6, so it's like they have such a consciousness of like having traps and avoiding traps. So whether you like rationalism or not,
Heidegger is, I don't think his point was about ideals. You're being rather idealistic.
I'm not saying that his point is idealistic or not. What I'm saying is that when you're in the real world, there is room for rationalization. And without rationalization, you don't have the opportunity to be able to accomplish some of your projects. If your mother has serious problems, like if you have someone in your family who has an illness, you don't really have the opportunity to sort of like jump ahead and second guess other people's medical decisions. If you have a doctor that's making a medical decision, you might not be able to second guess it. If your relative has made a medical decision on their own behalf, you don't necessarily always have an opportunity to second guess their medical decisions. So you have to be very careful about what decisions you do make at all times. And this is a form of rationalization. That's all I'm saying, is that the part of mind that contributes to outcome can never really be fully asleep. It has to be available in the world. And to say that Dasein is not rational or will benefit from avoiding rationality or rationalism as an ideology, I don't think that's necessarily a constructive point, because the world is full of traps. And the way we avoid those traps is by rationalizing them, rationalizing ways out of them and ways to avoid them. What jobs we're willing to take, what jobs we're going to try to, how we manage our relationships at work, if that's different from the way we manage our relationships in our family or our relationships with friends at home or in a party or whatever. So this is all kind of like an open field. Thinking is an open field, and the decisions we make are critical to our existence. So that's a primordial way of viewing existence. Existence is an avoidance of death. So we have to be constantly in that kind of like sphere of awareness of our own fears and how to navigate those minefields.
Right. So making choices has to be justified by reason, right? Reason. But that's also, like being involved in the world of what he calls equipment, right? Is that related to the idea of the project? Is using the, getting involved in the world as a ready to hand?
Exactly. What's the ratio of rocks to people? The rocks outnumber us by millions and millions and millions to one.
Right.
The inanimate objects are like in charge. They can fall on your head. They can participate in a landslide and, you know, plow your house out of the way. They can burn it down. The rocks are, I mean, the rocks don't burn it down, but, you know, it's just saying that the inanimate objects, whether they're carbon atoms or rocks or whatever, they can do a lot of damage. And the fact is that we have to be aware of inanimate objects all the time. They're a part of our reality. Heidegger is saying here that your whole reality will become more acute to you when you start to think this way. Think in terms of your care for the world. Think in terms of your own thrownness. Think in terms of your fallibility, and think in terms of discourse in the world of your being present in the world.
He uses the word concern also, right? Is that like a stage before care?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. He explains it. He explains it. There's a right before he after he started outlining concern, he mentions that he telegraphs ahead and says this is a component of the structure, what I call the structure of being, and the concern is the training wheels version of care. We have concerns for our, you know, for our projects and so on and so forth. And he just is able to use a wordplay. He uses wordplay for a lot of things. So instead of saying care is Sorge in German, and I think Sorge maybe, but there's a German word for concern that translates as concern, and the Sorge is the one that he uses as sort of like showing that we care, we are concerned for things naturally. We have concern because of our fears. We have concern because, you know, we want certain outcomes, and because of our involvements in the world. And the overall, we could classify that whole sphere of human activity for Dasein as by one word, which is care or Sorge. So he's just basically using wordplay. He's using the similarity of the two words in German, but the care is what is the more powerful term. You know, that's kind of the term. That's where he's going. The full emotional import of having compassion for others.
I was going to say something like, you know, a newborn infant has concern for, you know, self and being warm and not being in pain. But, you know, care is a bit more sophisticated, you know, eventually to get to that. Maybe that's close to the idea. You can have concern at a most basic survivalist level, but care involves a bit more sophistication to involve, you know, another entity, or, you know, any object. Yeah.
So it sounds like a person is born with an authentic being, right? It comes into the world with concern, right? And gradually.
Well, you can be concerned about, being warm and not being hungry, not being in pain. And,
right. But those are authentic feelings of being.
Right.
And then gradually you could lose that and become, you know, less authentic, or you can become more, you know.
I have to go. So it's been great. Thanks, David and James. And Stephen, of course.
Get on, yeah.
Okay. Cheerio.
Okay, everyone. Keep watching the calendar, because I'll put more stuff on for next week.
Great, okay, no worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
All right.
Yeah, I'll put the next audio and the next reading, if there is one, I'm not sure yet, and the notes for what would be 7 days from today would be the 7th. Yeah, that's right. Tomorrow's the 1st. Happy new month, everybody.
Thank you, David. Thank you, James.
Okay, everyone.
Thank you.
Check the calendar, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.